presenting a blank production
United States versus Richard Nixon. Scene 1. Background information.
Back in the 1972 election between Richard Nixon and George McGovern, the Watergate scandal took place. Nixon, the Republican nominee, succeeded to Bug Watergate, a hotel that at the time was the headquarters for the Democratic Party. Eventually, Leon Jaworski, who was assigned to be the official investigator on behalf of the government by Nixon, but only after Nixon's original appointed investigator, Archibald Cox, was ordered to be fired by Nixon in the Saturday Night Massacre. The Saturday Night Massacre was a huge blown-up event where originally Nixon appointed Archibald Cox to review the tapes that supposedly Nixon had obtained by bugging Watergate. Then, Nixon submitted the Stennis Compromise, which was Nixon asking if it would be okay if John Stennis, who was a U.S. senator that happened to be hard of hearing, reviewed the tapes. But when Cox resented the opposition, Nixon got angry. Nixon then asked Attorney General Richardson to fire Cox, but he refused and eventually resigned in protest. The same happened to Deputy Attorney General Williams Ruckelshaus when Nixon asked him to fire Cox. It ended with the public sending in a gratuitous amount of letters and telegrams, which eventually led to the government to make Nixon appoint a new investigator, Leon Jaworski. Leon then went on to listen to the tapes and found evidence that Nixon was part of the scandal. Nixon then argued that he was completely immune to any court's ruling. A court case was held, and it was decided that Nixon or any other president was not immune to the judicial branch's ruling. Nixon was impeached. Finally, after roughly 2 weeks of the Supreme Court's decision that said Nixon wasn't immune to the Supreme Court's ruling, Nixon resigned from office.
Hi, I'm President Nixon, and I have just hired 5 people above the Democratic headquarters in the Watergate Hotel. I have all the tapes now, and I have insight of what those Democrats are doing. I have hired Archibald Cox to investigate, only to ask John Stennis to review the tapes. It just so happens that Stennis is hard of hearing. But Cox has refused to let me do so, which ended up in the resignation of Attorney General Richardson and Deputy Attorney General Williams, workaholics, because they wouldn't fire Cox. And now the public has relentlessly asked for me to appoint a new investigator, which I did. But I think Leon, my new investigator, has found something in the tapes I gave him. I am the President of the United States. I am as powerful as Louis the 24th, and I am above the judicial branch. Besides, this is within the executive branch and has nothing to do with the judicial branch. Scene 2, the Supreme Court's ruling.
After further review of the evidence and the argument made by President Nixon, it has been deemed that the President of the United States is not above the Supreme Court's ruling under the United States Constitution.
Scene 3, why the Supreme Court ruled the way they did, or RTSC-RTWTD for short.
The Supreme Court has to rule the way they did because what President Nixon was saying went totally against the idea of checks and balances that is clearly listed in the Constitution. If the Supreme Court has no ruling over the President and his actions, then there would be almost no reason to have a Supreme Court.
Scene 4, how the Supreme Court's ruling affected the parties involved and the citizens of the U.S., or HTSC-RETPIATCOTU for short. The Supreme Court ruling changed many thoughts about me. The citizens of America were very disappointed in what I had committed. It brought to light that the people of this nation do care and have a concern as to who is leading them. The Supreme Court, listening to all their telegrams and whatnot, reassured them that they do have power in our government and that they have rights. Everyone in the country was involved, especially the government. It made the government really think about how the checks and balances system that was put into place to ensure that power doesn't get out of hand, and that what I tried to do would never work. In all, it made Americans think about how lucky they are to have the government they have, and how this great nation really is. The end.